Hi everyone. So on the forum is the supply list that you'll need to follow along with my monthly quilt along, which is starting February 2021. The idea of doing the quilt along is that I've chosen 4 blocks from within the ScanNCut machine and I'm going to cut and sew 1 block per month using my ScanNCut SDX 2200 Disney machine. But anybody with a ScanNCut can follow along with this quilt along no matter what model you have. You're going to need some basic supplies, so that's what I'm going to run through today. At the end of the quilt along, there's going to be a final video showing how to assemble the 4 blocks that I'm going to make into a 20 by 20 inch cushion cover with a zip fastening. So I've got here a 24-inch zip. I always like to make mine use bigger zips on my projects because I cut them down as I sew them. So I've got a white zip. You're going to need some kind of wadding or batting to quilt the block, and this will be used for assembling at the end. It doesn't really matter what type of wadding you use, whether it's, a cotton or a fleece based, or I'm not quite sure what this type's called, but any kind of wadding. All I would say is you don't want something too thick. This one is nice. Some of them are like a high loft wadding and they're quite thick, but you just want a piece of wadding. Again, you want this bigger than the finished cushion is going to be. So I would say a minimum of 22 inches square or 24 inches for your wadding. You need your pattern fabrics to make your blocks. I'm using this fat quarter bundle, which is available from Makers, and it's the blue and yellows, and there are 5 different coloured fat quarters. My plain fabric is going to be white cotton, so you need, I think in the supply list I've said 2 yards. That should be more than enough. You also need a 20 by 20 inch cushion pad. ScanNCut wise, obviously you need your machine and you need a few other supplies, so I'm just going to run through them quickly. If you're using a DX or SDX machine, so a machine with the auto blade technology, you can use the fabric mat and the accompanying fabric blade and blade holder. If you've not got the fabric mat or fabric blade and you're using an auto blade machine, you can use your regular standard mat with your regular standard blade, which is the black top blade holder, and you can apply a sheet of the high-tack adhesive fabric support to your mat. This sticks to a mat. A good idea would be to use an old mat, because once you stick this to your mat, it's a bit of a devil to get off. So you could stick this to it and then just use that old mat as your fabric mat. I would also suggest, if you're going to use your regular mat, that you buy a blade, just a normal standard blade that you keep just for the fabric quilt along, and swap your blade out of your regular holder whenever you're using fabric. If you are using a CM model machine, so a machine without the auto blade technology, again, I would recommend either buying a mat or using an old mat and buying a piece of the high-tack fabric support and applying that to the mat. Again, I would purchase a regular standard cutting blade for your model machine and just pop that into your blade holder. I would also suggest, before you start the quilt along, that you put a scrap piece of fabric onto your mat and do some test cutting for your machine, because obviously with a CM machine you've got to set the blade depth and the cutting pressure. So you need to make sure that you're comfortable with how your machine is going to work for cutting fabric before you start the quilt along. And you know, you don't want to be wasting any of your fabric. So get a piece of fabric that's similar to what you're going to be using, a scrap of it if possible. Put that onto your, you know, high tack support sheet, which you've stuck to an old mat, and get yourself a new spare blade and just designate that blade for fabric. And then use the test cut facility on your machine, play around with the blade settings and the cut pressure until you get a nice clean cut of your fabric without cutting, you know, right through the high tack support sheet. And then you'll know what blade settings and what have you to use for when you come to start making your project. You're also going to need a fabric pen and a holder. These are the original fabric pens that came with my machine. The purple one is air erasable, which means once you've drawn something with this, it will disappear over time. And the blue one is water erasable. The other thing is, if you've not got, you know, the original little pen holder that came with these pens with your machine, one of the multi-purpose pen holders with a fabric pen that will fit in it will do equally as good. So they're kind of your basic supplies that you're going to need. On your supply list, I suggested getting 2 yards of your plain fabric. This is my 2 yards. I'm using white cotton. From this white cotton, which is approximately 64 inches wide by 39 inches wide. So on the 64-inch side, I've cut off a piece that is 22 inches wide. So I was left with a piece of 22 inches by 64. From that piece, I then cut 2 pieces of 22 inches wide from that 64-inch length. So these 2 pieces here are 22 by 22. These are for when all the blocks have been sewn, and these are going to be the backing for the front and the back of the cushion, if that makes sense. So the remaining piece of white fabric that was left from my 22 by 64 strip is now this piece of fabric here. I've cut this down to about 11 inches wide, and this strip is going to be the first piece that I cut my solid sections from for block 1. For the patterned fabric for block 1, I've taken one of the fat quarters, and these fat quarters are 18 inches by 24 inches. So on the 24-inch side, I'll show you with this grey one, it might be easier to see. But when you open up your fat quarter, one of the edges has got the selvage edge on. It's got like little holes in it. And then they sometimes have a bit of a frayed edge as well. I cut the selvage edge off. That left me with a piece that was about 21 inches wide. So from this 21-inch piece, I've then cut a strip that is 11 inches wide. So it's going to be about 11 by 18. It doesn't matter that it's going to hang off the mat. You want it to be within your 12 by 12 inch mat, okay? And this is the piece I've cut. So basically I've got 2 pieces of fabric that are about the same width, 11 inches wide. This one is about 18 inches long because that's the size of the fat quarter. This one is marginally longer because this came out of my yardage. Okay, I'm going to come into patterns. I'm going to scroll down and find the patchwork section, and I'm going to choose the first block in this section, which then opens up all the different available blocks that are in this first package, if you like. So the one that I'm going to use is PA-A002. So I'm going to select that block. The block has come in at 9 inches square. I'm going to make all my blocks 10 inches. So I'm just going to use the plus arrow and take this up to 10 inches, and I'm going to say OK. And then because I've got my white fabric on my mat, the blocks that I want to draw and cut in this fabric are blocks A, B and B1. So I'm going to choose block A and say OK and set, and then I'm going to go add, and I'm going to choose block B and see if there's enough room to put this on the mat and say set. Now it's telling me there's not enough space on the mat, so that's fine. I'm just going to go back, and I've just got the 4 blocks there for now, and I'll just draw and cut these first and then see about adding the second and the third sections on separately. So I'm just going to go into edit and object edit, and I'm just going to make sure my seam allowance is on and just say OK. I'm going to say OK again, and I'm going to do a background scan and start. I'm just going to go into the settings and see if I can make the background darker. Now I can see that these 4 blocks are not exactly on this piece of fabric, so I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to choose the 3 red boxes, and I'm going to choose the second icon which chooses everything and say OK. And now I can move these as a group. So I want to, save as much fabric as possible, but I also want to cut them and know that they're going to cut and not be too near the edge. So I think they look okay. So you can leave them as a group, it doesn't really matter, or you can ungroup them. I'm going to keep saying OK, select and draw. So now I'm going to bring in my little pen holder. This is the one that I'm going to use, but you could use any pen holder and any fabric pen, and I'm going to be using the Air Erasable pen, which is the one with the purple strap around the top. I'm just going to pop the lid into the little holder and pop my pen in and put this into the machine. So I'm going to put that in and drop that into place, and then on the machine I'm going to say start. One thing I would point out is that my fabric on my mat is right side down, so I'm drawing on the wrong side of the fabric. Now this particular piece of fabric obviously is plain, so there's no kind of right or wrong side, but when you come to using your pattern fabrics you want the right side down to the mat, so you're looking at the wrong side of the fabric, because that's the side you're going to be drawing on and you're also going to be sewing on. Okay, so I'm just going to say start, and it should now draw the shapes for me. Okay, so I'm going to choose finish. I'm going to take the pen out of the machine and I'm going to put in my fabric blade. So now, without unloading the mat or doing anything else, I'm just going to go to select and cut and start. Okay, so I'm going to choose part B and I'm going to see if I can choose part B1 at the same time. So I'm going to select part B and say OK and set, and then I'm going to come to add and add part B1 and say OK and set. I'm going to do a background scan to scan this piece of fabric and work out how to get these cut from this remaining piece of white fabric. So I'm just going to move them around and I'm going to rotate them to make the best use out of the fabric. And it doesn't matter because this is plain white fabric, so it doesn't matter about the orientation. So I'm just going to select one, go to edit, object edit, and I'm going to rotate it and then just try and kind of nest them so I can get, as I say, the best use out of this piece of fabric. So I'm going to rotate this one and position that up here, and then see if I can get this one in here. So hopefully I should be able to get the 4 elements from the bottom half of this piece of fabric. I'm just going to put the pen back in, choose OK, OK again, and select draw. I'm going to say finish because that takes me back a page. I'm going to take the pen out, put my fabric blade back in, choose select and cut and start. So now when I peel the fabric away, I've got the next elements of the block. So this is what we've got so far. 4 squares and 4 triangles cut in white fabric. So now I'm going to do exactly the same with the pattern fabric. So I'm just going to unload this mat and bring my fabric mat back in. I'm going to get my piece of fabric that I'm going to use for block 1, and I'm going to position it on the mat, right side down. And then I'm going to go back to the machine and choose the next parts for this particular block. So I've just hit the back button. I'm going to go to edit, select all the items on the mat, say OK, and just send them into the rubbish. And then I'm just going to come back to the block number 2. I need to make it 10 inches. I'm going to say OK. And then the next part, I'm going to cut these 3 sections from the pattern fabric. So again, I'm going to choose block C and say OK and set. I'm going to go to add, choose block C1 and say OK and set. And then see if I can get part 3 on as well. So I'm going to go to add, choose block D, which is just the one shape in the middle, say OK and set. So I can now get all the elements from the pattern fabric on this one piece of fabric. Just going to go edit, select all the shapes by choosing the 3 red boxes and then this box on the right hand side. That just selects everything on my mat. I'm going to say OK, object edit, and I'm just going to group them for a minute, say OK, OK, and do a background scan because I want to make sure that I can get all those shapes onto this piece of fabric because this piece of fabric is not 12 inches wide. So I'm going to say start. While I'm just doing that, I'm going to take the blade out and put the pen back in. Okay, so I can see now that the patterns do extend off the side of the fabric, so I'm just going to manoeuvre them around so that they fit within this boundary here of the fabric. So I'm going to go to edit, object edit and ungroup, and then just select anywhere on my mat to deselect. And I'm just going to position all the shapes now so that I can see them. Now this particular fabric doesn't have any kind of orientation, so I can flip my shapes around. So I've got one here, I've selected the next one, I'm going to go to rotate and I'm going to rotate it, and then hopefully I can position it up near the first one, and then I think I might be able to get the square in there. And then I'm going to choose the next one and just rotate it around and bring this one in. And then I should be able to get all the elements cut and be able to save some fabric. So I'm not sure how well, in fact, you didn't see any of that, did you? So basically, I've scanned the mat and I've just positioned all the shapes so that I've rotated some so that I can get them within the confines of this piece of 11-inch wide fabric. So I'm going to say OK, OK again, OK, another OK, select and draw. So you can see now how I've positioned them. Now the fabric isn't there. I've just manoeuvred them around so that they fit within the element of the fabric on my mat. So I'm going to say finish. That takes us back a page. I'm going to take out the pen, put the blade in, and then this time I'm going to say select and cut. And now start. So now that's finished, I'm just going to say finish, unload the mat because that is all the elements for block 1. So I'm going to peel away the fabric, and then sometimes you do get little, threads that hang on. So if that's the case, just, get your scissors and just snip. See, I've just got a thread there. But everything else is, cut fine. So this is what we've got now. This one looks a little bit wonky. I think my fabric moved, but it'll be okay. And then I've got the 4 triangles. So that's all the elements now required to make block number 1. Okay, I've got all the elements for the block now. So basically, you can clearly see which are your squares. And then these other elements here are what are known as half square triangles. Now I'm going to sew the half square triangles together first so that they make a square, and then I'm going to sew them in rows. Now you can either sew them in rows this way or this way, it doesn't really matter. I generally work from left to right across the top. So once I've got the half square triangles sewn together and put back in this pattern, then I'll know how to sew them together. And if you lay them out in this order, you'll not get your pieces sewn in the wrong place. If you're unsure of how your pattern is, going to be laid out and sewn together, a quick tip is if you go to the machine and just call up your pattern, you can see the white sections here are represented by my white fabric. Yours might be, another plain colour, or it might be patterned. It's entirely up to you. But the green elements here are my pattern fabric. So I can see, for instance, that this top middle section, the triangle, comes from the bottom left-hand corner. And then you can see that they rotated around. So that's just, a visual aid, or take a picture of it on your phone at the beginning and then just look at it on your phone. So if you look back here now, you'll see that my triangle is in this orientation. So I'm just going to set the sewing machine up and then I'm going to be ready to sew. Okay, so as I said, I've got my block laid out. I've just put it on my little ironing mat and I'm going to sew the half square triangles together. So I'm going to start with the one on the top row. I'm going to put right sides together. And I'm going to, you don't need to worry about setting your needle to a 1/4 inch seam allowance or anything like that, because all you're going to do is sew along this line here just to make a square effectively. So I'm going to pop that under the machine. I'm going to put my foot down. Okay, so I'm just going to follow this purple line. Just making sure that the edges of my 2 half square triangles are lined up. I'm not pulling or stretching the fabric. So that's my first one sewn together. So I'm just going to pop that back in its place over here now. I'll press it at the end and then I'm just going to move on to the next one. So I'm going to do this one and then this one. And as I do them, I'm just going to pop them back into the place so that they're then all in the right order, ready to sew when I'm sewing my rows together. Okay, so this is what I've got now. And they usually say press the seam to the dark side of your fabric. So I've got this dark side up and then I'm just pressing the seam out. And then really what I suppose I should do on this one is, because that's pressed to the light, so I'm going to turn this one over, press the dark side and then press it out like so. And then I just need to make sure that I'm putting it back in the right orientation. And I just need to do the same with this one. So this is the kind of bit that really is the bit that needs the most thinking about, how you press your design and that kind of thing. So this one I think goes in that way. So this is where it's a good idea to have your manual with your picture of your design, or, you know, take a picture from the ScanNCut screen and keep it on your camera, or have your ScanNCut screen open as I showed you before. I've just closed all mine down just to give me some more room while I'm filming. So I think they're all right now by the look of it. So now I'm going to sew the rows together. So I'm going to put the first square with the next section that I've just sewn, line the edges up, put this in the machine and sew down this draw line. And again, if you want to press as you go, keep your iron on and just give the block a press. You can press open the seams if you want to, it's entirely up to you. So the white square goes in the top corner, so I'm just going to press out that block. Then I'm going to get the next section from this top row and line that up with that one and then sew down here. And I'm going to do that on every block. Now it's a case of sewing the 3 rows together. So again, check the orientation of your design, make sure that you've sewn your, blocks together properly, make sure your pattern all looks right. And then again, I start from the top, so I'm going to put the top row to the middle row. To get your seams all lining up, you need to do what's called nesting your seams. So if I turn the top 2 rows over, you can see that the seams on the 3 blocks are all going that way on this row. So I want them all going this way on the next row. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give this all another quick press so that the seams are all going in the right direction, and then on the middle block I'm going to press the seams to the left. So this first one's already going to the left. I just need to push this one over, and then on the last row, if I turn, so if I put these back, and then on the last row, this needs to go the opposite way. So these need to go to the right. So this one already is, so I just need to press this one over. And it just helps the seams go together better when you're sewing your rows. And all these little things will all help for the finished result. So I'm going to come back to my first row, flip it over on top of my second, and then I'm going to nest the seam. So I'm going to get the seam from this block here and nest it so it lines up with the seam of this block here. And then I'm just going to push the seams in opposite directions. So that one's going to the left, this one's coming to the right, and I'm just going to pop a pin in just to hold it. Then I'm going to come over and do the same with this. So there's the seam and there's the seam, and I'm going to line them up so they sit together and pop a pin in. And then I'm just going to pop this back under the machine and follow the drawn line. I'm going to stop before I get to the pin. My needle's in the down position, so the fabric's not going anywhere. Just going to make sure that the edges are all lined up and carry on sewing, following that drawn line. And again, when I get near the pin, I'm going to stop and carry on and just sew off. I'm going to just open that out, make sure it all looks okay, and then I'm going to get the bottom row, flip that on top. Again, you can put pins in and nest your seams, or if you're a confident sewer, you can just, do it by eye. It's up to you. Just going to pop this back under the machine, and we're nearly done with our first block. Going to remove the pin. And at the end of the day, if your seams don't line up, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world, but using the ScanNCut and drawing in your sew lines does help you get, a decent finish. So here's the block. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to iron all the seams now one way and the other way, just to help it all lie flat. And I'm not sure whether you're meant to use steam or not, but I'm just going to hit it with a bit of steam. Turn it over, and that's block 1 done. Now, obviously I've gone a little bit wrong here somewhere because this is a little bit short, but these blocks should be 10 inches or thereabouts when they're finished. So I'm just going to measure at the shortest width here, and I've got probably 10 1/8, something like that. So I can square this block up to 10 inches. Okay, so if you've got a 10-inch square ruler, all the better. If not, you just need, you know, preferably a quilter's ruler. This edge looks pretty much square, so basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to choose one of the dark solid lines on my ruler and put that to the bottom of this block, and I'm just going to put it on the edge. And if I know that this line is horizontal, this should be at the right angle, and I'm just going to run along and remove any of the little bits. So I know now that this is a square edge. So I'm going to turn that round, and I'm now going to line this square edge up on my line here on my cutting mat, and then I can see I've got 10 inches marked on the bottom of my mat. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to choose, I don't know how well you'll see it, but there's like a solid black line on the ruler against every inch mark. I'm going to put that on the bottom of the block. Make sure that my block is lined up right on where the inch mark starts here. I can see my 10-inch mark and cut. And I'm not cutting any of the points or anything off on the blocks. And I'm going to trim the same and just trim everything away. And then I'm just going to rotate it and just see how we're looking on this side. So again, I'm lining the edge of the block up with the black line here on my ruler, which is the start of my inch mark. And then I'm about 10 1/4. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut 1/8 off this side. So I'm going to cut at 10 1/8. Again, lining up the black line on the bottom of my ruler here, because I know that this is a straight edge. Cut that away, flip it round, and then again just square this up to 10 inches. So you just, you know, trimming slithers off, really. You're not trimming a lot off, you're just getting rid of So that's your first block, 10 inches by 10 inches, all squared up. You can put that away now, wait for next month, and we'll make block 2.